Hi, my name is Michael Dell. I'm a Kahnawake Rono living with special needs. When I was interviewed, I had an idea for a show for people from Kahnawake living with disabilities. Today is the start of that show, Walk in My World. Often, people with disabilities lead sheltered lives, and their interactions are limited to caregivers and family members. I hope this show will bring you awareness of these people, their families, their lives, and their dreams for the future. Welcome back to Walk in My World. Today we are here to interview the former Director of Education in Kahnawake, Eddie Cross. Welcome, Eddie, and thank you for joining us today on Walk in My World.
Thank you, Michael.
We will be talking about how it was to integrate people with special needs way back then, from the beginning. So maybe you can start by explaining how many years you teach in the Kahnawake Education System.
Okay, well, teaching was my first part of my contribution to education in Kahnawake, but my total number of years servicing the community was 44 years, and I retired on June 30th of this year.
After you stopped teaching, you moved on to the Kahnawake Education Center. So what were your roles in the Kahnawake Education Center?
Mm-hmm. Well, my first years were as a classroom teacher. I taught grade 6 and grade 4. And during those years, I also went to McGill University to complete a master's in special education. And when I completed that, then I started my work in providing services and programs and staffing for students in the system with special needs.
So you helped to create those programs within Kahnawake?
Yes, I would say I played a very key role in the establishment of services for children that required more than a regular classroom teacher can provide.
Okay, so, but before that, before you started all that, where did our disabled Kahnawake Rono have to go to school?
Well, in the case of my siblings, my brothers, Harold and Glenn and Charlene, they didn't go to school, they stayed home. And I think that was typical of other families in Kahnawake who had children that had a whole range of different special needs.
You would say when you got there in Kahnawake Education System that you were one of the pioneers to bring all that to Kahnawake?
Yes, I would say so. And if I can go back to my family history, I felt that it was important to provide the services to a whole range of children with special needs. My family is made up of 3 brothers that had special needs. I have a photo of my brothers here. My brother Harold, who was just 2 or 3 years older than I am, was removed from the community and placed in an institution in Quebec City, Hotel Dieu du Sacré-Cœur. And he was placed there by the medical services in Kahnawake at that time. It was a nurse, they used to call her the big nurse, and she recommended to my mother that it was best to place Harold in this institution. And it was only many years later that I realized that it was an institution for adults, and at that time he was a 12-year-old boy. And he was also in an environment where the only language spoken was French. So it was very, very hard on him and very hard on us. As I said, we would go and visit him once or twice a year. And it was a very, very emotional meeting each time because he really missed us, and he particularly missed my mother. When the institution closed about 20 years ago, they had to place all of the, well, at that time called patients, in other institutions. And my brother Harold was placed in a convalescent home in Verdun. And we only found that out. No one told us about my brother being transferred out of this institution that he was in Quebec City to a convalescent home in Verdun. It was a visitor from Kahnawake who saw my brother and recognized that he could be from Kahnawake and contacted the hospital, and the hospital consequently contacted my family, and we immediately had him transferred to Kahnawake Memorial Hospital at that time. And he lived out his years in that institution, in that hospital. But because I have three siblings who were, I guess we'd call them handicapped today, or with special needs, I really spent a lot of my time when I was in university trying to find out, how was this caused? How did they become that way when my other four brothers had no problems at all, were very normal. So it was a search for most of my life on answers to questions that I had, and I often found those answers, I said, when I went to university, and I did a lot of research.
So getting back to when you were helping to start Kahnawake education for people with special needs in Kahnawake, did you stumble across any stumbling blocks along the way, or was it an easy process?
Well, at that time, special education was not a major concern of education institutions, and only later did the Ministry of Education, and in our case, we're sponsored by Indian Affairs through an organization called First Nations Education Council. And when First Nations Education Council was founded, one of their major objectives was to look at how can we help First Nations communities in Quebec who have children with special needs. And in most cases, none of those communities had any kind of services. So I would say that Kahnawake was a pioneer in terms of providing services for children with special needs in their community schools.
Did the families of special needs children participate willingly?
Yes, they did. I know that in my case, there were a group of mothers who got together, and they would meet and just discuss their common concerns and needs, and it was just kind of a grassroots group of mothers. And only later did it become much more formalized, where the schools worked very closely with homes and parents in providing support services for the parents as well as for the children.
At that time, did the staff have any special training?
No, as I said, special education training wasn't part of university education, and that only came in very, very recently. So fortunately, some of our teachers were able to get into programs like that. But because of the fact that there was limited enrollment, we started to provide training in-house in our community schools, particularly at Kahnawake School.
One question I'm going to change over.
Sure.
How did the kids that didn't have special needs react to having kids with special needs in their school? How was that integration process started?
Yeah, I have never experienced it being a problem. Most of the children who were in the schools were siblings or friends or neighbors, and so they knew each other. They knew the families, and it never seemed to have been an issue from my experience.
Would you say that Kahnawake is up to par with other Native communities?
Oh, like, years and years ahead of other communities. And only because we had people who were committed to providing programs and services. And I keep going back to FNEC, First Nations Education Council, who really supported this initiative and were successful in getting the government to allocate funding for it.